Welcome to this podcast.
All right, so when I left off last time, I had finally returned back to the motherland. Now, you have to remember that back then I had not been debeanerized yet. Okay, nothing about being politically correct, okay? You know I'm not politically correct and I say what I want to say. So, I was still a Mexican citizen with a resident card to be able to live in the United States. It was very weird being back there, but I was there in Mexico visiting family. Now, one thing that I clearly remember is that when I had left with my mom and dad, I had a chicken. Yes, a chicken that I had raised from the time that it was a little baby chick. It was a project that my kindergarten teacher had us do, so we understood how a chick was born, and we had to raise it and talk about it in class. But anyway, I left my chicken there at my grandma's house. Now, when I got there, I remember clearly the first thing that I really asked her was, "Where's my chicken?" Because I wanted to see, how much bigger she was and if she was laying eggs, all those good things that maybe, a kid would want to see for his chicken, which I considered to be my pet. Next thing I know, I was traumatized because I found out that my grandma had killed my chicken, cooked it, and made chicken soup. So you can imagine how I felt when they told me that. So right then and there, when I was told that, I was so traumatized that this was my pet, my little friend that I had left there. And I started to have flashbacks. No, not PTSD flashbacks to being in combat, not those kind of flashbacks yet. These flashbacks was when I can remember that my grandpa bought a duck and my grandma decided that she wanted to cook this thing. But first things first, I remember that my grandma came and got me and my uncle, and me and my uncle are pretty much around the same age, and she told us, "Hey, let's go outside." So being young little kids and everything else, here we go, yay, grandma's gonna show us something, a little trick outside. And I remember walking down this long hallway. It seemed like it lasted forever, almost like if we were walking down a bad horror movie or something like that. Once we finally reached the door, she opened it. All I heard was a creak, and then we stepped outside. Now, in the patio was a cage with a duck inside. So all I heard was quack, 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 and almost if this thing was telling us, "Hey, what's going on? How you doing? Get me out of here." My grandma turned to me and she looked at me and she said, "Mijo, go inside and get the bottle of tequila." I stopped for a second and kind of thought, kind of weird that my grandma wants to drink tequila here first thing in the morning. But, with a puzzled look on my face, I went back inside and I grabbed the bottle. And to my surprise, when I got back, grandma wasn't really thirsty. So, she wasn't that kind of grandma that wanted to party at 9 in the morning or something like that. What struck me was that she started to pour tequila into the cap. And what she did next was she was giving the duck shots of tequila. I don't even know how many she gave this poor duck, but it was about 10 minutes or so, and I could see the poor duck and it was dazed. It looked like it was drunk. It had the biggest hangover that you can possibly imagine. And all of a sudden, Grandma took the duck, placed it on the floor, and put its head on top of a piece of wood. I thought to myself, hey, Grandma wants to give this duck a little pillow to let it lay there and be comfortable and all that stuff and everything else. So out of nowhere, and I mean out of nowhere, all of a sudden an axe appeared, almost like going whoosh, and then Grandma had the axe in her hand. It looked like Thor sticking his hand out, and there's the magic hammer. Grandma had an axe. I guess if you really think about it, for all our Hispanic cultures and everything else, everybody knows what the chancla is. It comes out of nowhere. Okay, mom, grandma, whoever, that chancla comes out and you know that you better behave because you're about to get it. Now, before we could even blink, we heard a loud swoosh and then a whack, almost as if lightning was striking. The swing that my grandma gave to the axe completely sliced through the duck faster than almost the Roadrunner getting away from the coyote in one of those Looney Tune cartoons. All we heard was a loud quack, and it almost sounded like a shriek. And then all we hear from my grandma is, "Get it, get it! Don't let it run away." To my surprise, that damn duck was running around everywhere. Every step that it took, there was a squirt of blood that shot out of that headless body running around. Now finally, we launched on top of it and were able to keep it down until it finally stopped moving. Now I want you to imagine this. Here are two 5-year-old kids covered in blood, looking like they just went through the biggest massacre that anybody has gone through. So we're standing there, panting, tired, right there in the middle of the porch. Now I can only imagine, what the hell people would say if they walked by and saw these two little kids and a grandma standing there with an axe right there in the patio. But hey, it is Mexico, so I guess it's kind of the normal. So they're not going to call protective services or anything like that. But I can only imagine that if we were here in the United States and somebody walked by and saw that, you can just imagine some of the trauma, the drama and things that would have happened. So that was my first experience that I had with dealing with an actual live animal from beginning to end. So getting the animal, killing the animal, prepping it to cook, all that stuff and everything else. Not as traumatizing anymore, but back then as a 5-year-old kid, you can possibly imagine. All right, well, let me get back to my chicken. So, I was devastated. I remember going outside in the patio. There was a patio in the middle of the house that was out there. And there I had a small little cage or a small coop where I had it there, and that's where my chicken was. I was hoping and praying that it was there and that they were just lying to me. But I get out there and there was nothing there. But basically, as a young little kid, I kind of got over that quickly. And before I knew it, our time was over and we had to head back to Kansas. After that, years seemed to fly by. Before you know it, I was 10 years old, and by the time that we were ready to leave Kansas, I was 12 going on 13. By that time, my dad had gotten orders to go to Bamberg, Germany, so down there in Europe, so we ended up having to move. Now, I learned how to speak English from going to school. So every day I was speaking English, all that stuff and everything else. But that wasn't the case for my mom. She really wasn't fluent in the language yet. She basically knew how to say yes, no, and answer some basic questions, but that was it. So we ended up being stuck doing everything that we needed to do after my dad had already left. Some of the things that, weren't done before he left. Maybe kind of should have been done, but they weren't done. Okay, but anyway, so here we are getting ready to go to Germany. We had to renew our passports. Now, me and my mom, we had Mexican passports because we were still Mexican nationals. So we had to go to the Mexican consulate. And by this time, we had gone back already down there to El Paso, next to Mexico, there in Juarez, where my grandma and grandpa lived. And we're getting ready to make the trip down to Germany. Now, I want you to kind of picture this. None of us had ever been on a plane before. And here we were about to make this trip all the way to Germany on a plane for hours and hours and hours on a plane with a mother that didn't speak any English, a little brother that was barely 5 years old, and me, the only one that spoke English that I had to pretty much translate everything that my mom had to do. So you can imagine how that flight was, how long it seemed for us, and how we dealt with it. Okay, but finally we made it there. And we headed to our house with my dad because he was waiting for us there at the airport in Bamberg, Germany. So he rented a house. Well, I come to find out that, he had to rent a house out in town because there was no base housing that was actually available for us to use. Man, we drove to what seemed like to the end of the earth. Now remember, we were in Germany, so we weren't back in the States. So now for those of you that cannot imagine, what does Germany actually look like? I know some of you that, kind of traveled with us and we deployed and everything else, and we stopped in Germany at the planes there when we were doing deployments and everything else. You kind of got an idea of what it looked like, but that was just the airport. Imagine all green, okay? To me, it kind of looks like the bluegrass down there in Kentucky and everything else. That's what it kind of looks like. Very vegetated area. It was beautiful, a lot of rolling hills, and it smelled like summer. Almost like if you opened up a bottle and opened it up, it smelled like summer. That's what it was like. Okay, so we drove and drove and drove, and we finally made to this small little town named Rudendorf. So we were finally there. Now this town looked like a small village that was in the middle of nowhere. So if you think about it, you see all these videos of the German Oktoberfest and stuff like that and everything else, the older buildings. That's exactly what it looked like. Okay, so we drove into the middle of town. About 2 blocks into the town, we made a left-hand turn and we made it to our new home. Now we pulled into this house and I noticed that it was a 2-story, and there was another family that lived on the 2nd floor. It wasn't a military family. This was an actual German family that didn't speak any English. The first thing that I noticed was that there was a barn in the back. There's also a shed. Went back there and kind of checked it out and everything else. And inside this shed were a bunch of tools. It looked almost like I was sitting in the middle of a Friday the 13th movie and I was just waiting for Jason to pop out of somewhere. Now, so this is something that we're going to call home for the next 2 years. And, being the only Mexican kid there, I was able to get the attention of a lot of the local girls there in the small town. So I can definitely say that, my preteen years were very delightful. So now by 1991, we were living on base housing in Germany. So I finally found myself around other military families, and by then I was already in the 7th grade, so my junior high years were spent there. After the whole Desert Storm conflict went on, my father deployed out there, came back and everything else, and it was time for us to head back to the States. And this time we were heading out to Fort Knox, Kentucky. Yes, Kentucky. A Mexican out there, right? The life of a military brat, it's always moving and leaving friends behind. So I started my high school years out there at Fort Knox High School, and I got to make some good friends and everything else. My best friend and I, that's where we first met and everything else, and we went to school there together, and we shared some great times. Both of us lived there on base housing with our parents and everything else, so we got to hang out and got to learn, about each other and everything else. He happens to be from an Italian background, and I'm from a Mexican background. Okay, so we kind of mixed it together and we got to learn with each other. And even till this day, we're still the greatest of friends. Now, one specific day that I remember about time that me and my friends spent together was that I remember that one day we were taken to the military police station there on base. Yeah, I know, right? Teenagers. So what happened was there was this kid that, that kept messing with us, picking fights and everything else. And he had made a report saying that one day when we were playing basketball at one of the local basketball courts there on base, that my friend and I showed up there, and my friend ended up bringing a .357 Magnum to show him that we had a gun and that we would take care of it if he started messing with us again. Now picture this. Last time I checked, a .357 Magnum is not a very concealable weapon, especially for a teenager to hide. A teenager that had basketball shorts on and stuff like that. So where could you hide this and show it to them, and how you able to play basketball with it? So it was kind of a joke and everything else. So I remember sitting there talking to the investigator, and they were questioning me and asking me about a gun, if I knew that if my friend's dad had a gun. Being a young kid, not really knowing too much about guns back then. I said, yeah, I seen a gun. He has a gun that's like silver looking with a little wheel on it, kind of like the cowboys have and stuff. So, back then I wasn't very familiar with the guns. And I was like, what the hell? We didn't do anything, why the heck am I being questioned? The only thing that my dad said the whole time that I was there was that I could no longer hang out with my best friend because all we did was get in trouble. Okay, it wasn't until a couple weeks later that we finally got a phone call from the police, and my dad found out that it was not true, that kid had made up the whole entire story, and he was just trying to do something to get us in trouble because he wanted to make sure that we were in trouble and that he could do whatever he wanted to do. You can see those times were a bit interesting. And the best thing about it was that the best was still yet to come, because we were about to become sophomores at our high school, and it was going to become very interesting because we were also about to become mobile. So just imagine that. So this is Gunny telling you that until next time, you are on Liberty Call.